1977, George Lucas formed a legacy.
The Force is with me, and I am with the Force.
Inspired by mythology, his saga has become a passion for many.
Feel the Force around you.
His legend has become our story.
It's true. All of it.
One of resistance.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
Rebellion.
Rebellion is built on hope.
And redemption.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
This is Star Wars Reactions.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Star Wars Reactions. We have a packed show today, and we are going to have so much fun. I just can't contain myself. This is going to be great. My name is Aaron Harris. I am one half of your hosting team, and joining me, he is the Anakin to my Obi-Wan. He is the David Motters. David, what's up, brother?
Oh, man, this is a big episode. This is a biggie, and I'm excited. I love who we have on, a good friend of ours, and as I always say, I'm ready to react.
Exactly. It's going to be a great show. We do have a guest with us today. He is incredible. If you know Star Wars podcasts, you know this man. He is a fantastic podcaster. He's a fantastic friend and a tremendous author. He is the Qui-Gon Jinn to our Obi-Wan and Anakin. We have Dan Z. How you doing, Dan?
Wow, gosh, you got me a little choked up there, buddy. That was so sweet of you. It's so wonderful to be on with both you and David. Of course, we've been friends for a long time. I was just thinking the other day about the first time I met you, David. It was first weekend that I met Aaron, and I was down at Disney World for a school trip. I was chaperoning it. We had a Coffee With Kenobi meetup on Main Street, USA, which is now Starbucks. And that was actually the day that I asked Aaron to take over as Rebels Reactions. And look at what you guys have done. You have far exceeded my very, very high expectations for you both. And I'm just so honored and delighted to be on the show with you guys sharing the microphone.
Oh, well, thanks, Dan. That's awesome. It's hard to believe it's been that many years ago. Time flies when you're having fun. We got a great show. We're going to be talking to Dan about his book, the Star Wars book, which has been released. Real quick, there has been a lot of news, but I'm not going to really go into news this week. I do want to take one quick moment here and just acknowledge the fact that the Star Wars family has lost an icon this week. With the passing of Dave Prowse. Dave was the man behind Darth Vader. He was in the suit for A New Hope, and really what a lot of people look at as the quintessential Vader. I remember the first time I saw him saw A New Hope, and he came walking in on the Tantive 4, and it's one of those moments that just give you chills. And I hated to hear of his passing this weekend at the age of 85. Guys, any memories of Dave that y'all want to share in his memory?
You go, Dan. You're the guest.
Oh, well, thank you. You know what? I never had the good fortune to meet David Prowse. I've always... I think we sort of take for granted that the impact that David Prowse has had on Star Wars, as you just mentioned, Aaron, with the Tantive 4. Yes, James Earl Jones's voice is bombastic and electric and one of the most significant voices in the history of cinema. But David Prowse gave him literally the swagger through the way he carried himself, through his size, through his physical stature, and the dignity and danger that he kind of exuded as he walked, through the Hoth Rebel base or in the Death Star or on the Star Destroyer or in the Emperor's throne room. He helped us picture Vader the way that we do. And whenever you're walking down a hallway and you're humming the Imperial March in your brain, or you're just whistling it or whatever you're doing, it's because of David Prowse, the impact he had. And he was a good humanitarian, a good man. He did a lot for people, and he will certainly be missed.
Yeah, and I think on my part, Aaron, I remember being 8 years old in 1977 and being in Midland, Michigan. I know Dan was in Louisiana. But I was up there, and I remember sitting down to watch it for the first time. And there was a family. It was the summer, and there was a family from Texas up there, and they said, "Whoa, we saw this movie yesterday. We came back today, and it's going to blow you away." And I remember seeing the Star Destroyer come overhead, and then when that door blows open and Dave Prowse steps through, you're like, "Holy mackerel!" And I was just reading something online. I thought he was 6'4". Something said he was 6'7". Just an imposing guy. And I was, again, going through Twitter and looking at some of the pictures of him bodybuilding. What a huge, huge guy. And I think maybe the favorite thing that I saw online, and I retweeted it, was a picture of him, Peter Mayhew, and Kenny Baker together. Maybe you guys saw it as well. But the person who sent it says, I hope you're having a pint up there, with Kenny and Peter Mayhew. And I thought that was so, so cool. So, yes, remember seeing this guy since I was 8 years old. So really sad to see him go.
It really was sad to get that news when we woke up, and it was a tragic loss to the Star Wars community. And I want to just take a moment to send our best wishes to his family and to his friends and his fans around the world. I know we count ourselves among them, but our thoughts and our prayers are with you. And he will definitely be missed in the Star Wars world. So,
amen to that.
Amen. So with that, I'm going to close out the news segment because, that's really it's a hard loss. So, but in better news, we got Dan Z, and we are going to pick his brain about the book he has co-authored with Pablo Hidalgo and Cole Horton called The Star Wars Book, Expand Your Knowledge of a Galaxy Far, Far Away, released by DK. Dan, I've known you a long time, my friend, and I know this was a dream come true for you, being able to actually write a Star Wars book, being such a big Star Wars fan. I got to ask you right off the bat, because I remember when I got the text from you that this happened. How did you feel when they first approached you to do this?
I thought for a hot second I was going to pass out. I had so much adrenaline and I was so excited. I was actually at the gym early in the morning, and I opened my email as I was getting ready, and I saw the subject about a Star Wars book. And you get a lot of cool emails when you do podcasting after a while. So I just opened it up thinking it was something that was like something to review or an interview opportunity or something of that nature. And then I scanned it, and I read that I was being introduced to someone who was with DK that wanted me to write a Star Wars book. And I couldn't, it was sort of hard to explain. I couldn't believe it, but there was a part inside of me that just was like giving myself a hug, saying, you know what, you worked really hard for this. This is the moment you've wanted. Let's go, man. Let's go do this. Let's go have some fun. I was so excited. I could not wait to tell my wife. But before I did that, I had to sit back down on the bench and kind of catch my breath and let the adrenaline wash over me so I could email them back, without doing any typos. Can you imagine saying yes, you want to write a book, and then doing a bunch of typos? I didn't want that to happen, especially as an English teacher. So I did that. I told them I was excited, and then the process started, and it's been endlessly fascinating because, having the good fortune to be on Coffee with Kenobi for, almost 8 years. To see it from a different point of view where you're the author instead of someone talking to the author, and seeing the process of how a book comes together and the editing process and the collaboration and the working with Lucasfilm, and it's been just such a master class in the joy of publishing and in combining your passions together. And I could go on and on, fellas, but it was just absolutely, as you said, an absolute dream come true that I do not take for granted.
Excellent. It definitely is a phenomenal book, and if people haven't picked it up, you need to.
Thank you.
This was. I love the fact I love these type of books. It covers all types of things and gives you all kinds of lessons on everything involved in the saga. But obviously, the creative process for a book like this is very different than for, let's say, Zahn writing Thrawn Ascendancy. What is the creative process on a book like this like? When it comes to collaborating with your co-authors and everything, picking out what material you're putting in a compilation book like this.
Right. Well, you're early on in the process. You're given a list of the different sections, and there are proposals already in place from DK and the editor that say what they want you to tackle and what they want you to write about. And so then you look at them and you start banding ideas about with everyone and sort of debating what you think should go in and what shouldn't. But ultimately you have, I mean, they're 1 page, 2 page, and 4 page sections. So you only have a certain amount of time in real estate to really cover the basic stuff. So what I tried to do is I tried to filter through the lens of what's the most important core essence of these characters or these moments in Star Wars or this part of the lore and mythology. What makes it tick? What is essential, both for people who are first-time consumers of Star Wars or long-time veterans of Star Wars and fandom and movies and books and things like that. So you want to try to distill all that information down to what's the most important and essential. And to me, and no one ever told me this specifically, but I was thinking a lot of people are going to have a lot of Star Wars books. So I got to do something. I got to try to explain these things in such a way that either no one has thought about it from this perspective, or to try to state things in a way that maybe hasn't been stated before. And really the best way to do that is just kind of try to just be yourself and put your own spin on it. So that was a wonderful challenge, but one that I very much welcomed.
Very good. Very good.
Hey, Dan, I got one for you. In several of the other interviews I've heard you give on the Star Wars book, most notably Coffee with Kenobi number 366, I went back through that again and just really listened to you and Pablo and Cole and Matt Jones talk about the whole process. It was fascinating and so insightful. So in that one, you talked about how this DK book, the Star Wars book, is more about the how and the why and not just the what. And so what I thought is I just wanted to follow that up and just, can you talk about that a little bit more for our listeners? And because I loved how you've discussed that. And I do get it. I love how it is about the how and the why and not just the what. But can you share a little bit with our listeners?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and thank you. Yeah, to me, there, a good Star Wars book that explains the lore and isn't like Aaron said, isn't something that Timothy Zahn would write, because you're trying to basically take information from Star Wars and explain it. But this is a series of curated essays, so you're able to go much more deeper and much more profoundly into things instead of explaining sort of the what, as it were, of what things are and just basically encyclopedia facts. This is a chance to really break it down and to analyze it, to use the language, use your explanation, use your beliefs of how these characters work, what makes them tick, what makes them grow, what are their key arcs that help to shape who they are by the end of their stories, and really focus on them and analyze it and break it down. In a way, it's not unlike what we've done on Coffee with Kenobi or what I do on StarWars.com for the different blogs I've written over the years. You get a chance to really analyze it. And one of the big things that we love as Star Wars fans is analyzing the saga, breaking down the motifs, the themes, the metaphors, the symbols, and trying to explain what's really going on and what the higher purpose is, and basically literature. I've showed this book to a few people who have said this is like a Star Wars textbook. And I guess it kind of is. When I saw it in person for the first time, that's what really kind of struck me, that this is a great exploratory way to understand the Star Wars mythology. And one of my coworkers said, I really want to get your book, but I don't know anything about Star Wars. And I said, well, that's precisely why you need to get it then. Because if you want to understand this story, I'd like to think it's written sort of in the middle, where people who are either new fans or veteran fans of this franchise can really take it apart. And the how and the why means, how does it work? Why does it work? Yes, Obi-Wan Kenobi, lives on Tatooine, for 19 years and watches over Luke Skywalker as a young man. But why is that important? How does he make that work? And what does that show us about him as a character? And what makes him so intriguing? And I know, Aaron, Obi-Wan is obviously a very, very important character to you as well. And you probably have heard me say this on other shows, but Obi-Wan Kenobi was actually the first entry I got to write for the Star Wars book. It just kind of happened that way. And I thought, well, isn't this really kind of perfect?
Really, you couldn't have been more perfect, especially for you, host of Coffee with Kenobi, to write about Obi-Wan. And I was actually really excited when I heard you got to write about Obi-Wan. That took me to cloud nine, because Kenobi's my next to Chopper. Kenobi's my favorite.
Oh, so, I know, right? I love both of them.
So it was fun hearing you get to write about Obi-Wan. What can you share more about what you learned or insights you've gleaned from writing about Obi-Wan, or even about what you wrote about Leia?
Right. Yeah. Well, the stuff about Obi-Wan is cool, and that one took me the longest because that was the first entry I did. So I was very much trying to find the DK tone and the style for the specific book, because each book kind of has its own flavor naturally. What I learned about Obi-Wan, though, is the emphasis on patience, the key to his relationship with Qui-Gon Jinn and how that's played out in Claudia Gray's novel Master and Apprentice, how integral that is to understanding what Obi-Wan Kenobi is all about. Certainly there's a lot there with the Clone Wars and his relationship with Anakin Skywalker, but the challenge for me in writing this was not making it all about Obi-Wan and Anakin. Anakin is a big part of Obi-Wan's story, but it's just a part of his story. It doesn't define completely who he is. And that's just like in real tragedy. And of course, David, you would know well because of what you do for your day job, but trauma and tragedy are powerful things, and we can use them as springboards or we can use them as shackles. And Obi-Wan Kenobi very much takes that and to try to grow and to be better, try to learn from his mistakes or his perceived mistakes, even though I certainly think we could debate if he made mistakes or not. I mean, no one is perfect, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is not. But there's a lot there that's important about him. And as far as Leia goes, I was reminded of the daunting amount of things that she has suffered throughout her entire life, all the people she's impacted and affected and built up, where she very much would have every reason to just sort of crawl up into the fetal position and give up on life, but she doesn't. But there are other little things about Star Wars that I learned, like when I wrote about the Force or Force powers, how kyber crystals work and how they help to not only focus a Jedi's power, but also help to sort of serve as a calming mechanism for them, to help to center them in the Force. So that connection to their lightsaber, when Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Anakin Skywalker in Attack Clones, this weapon is your life. There's more to it than just because it looks cool and sounds cool and it can protect you from blaster fire. It's because it helps to center you in battle and helps you to meditate on the Force. And there are fun little things like that throughout this entire book that really constantly had me just sort of wowing, if that makes sense.
Well, I love what you're saying there, Dan. I even over the summer when you were writing a lot of articles for StarWars.com, the one you did on Leia, I mean, I jumped all over Twitter regarding that, and it was just outstanding. And to see what you pulled over, for her and for Obi-Wan was incredible.
Thank you.
This might be a quick little question, Dan. I've got my book right here. I've got my Star Wars book. I was kind of an old school guy. I went to Barnes & Noble and I got it, and I texted you, and I had to brag about you to the woman. I had to open up the front of the book, and I said, "You see that right there? That's my buddy, Dan Zare." And she just kind of looked at me and was like, pleasantly surprised, but I had to brag about you down here in Florida. But here's what's interesting. I'm flipping through the book, and I've read the bulk of it. The parts that are fascinating are the whole thing, but like on the Force, on the Skywalkers, on the Mandalorian, just incredible. But let me ask you about this, and I think I heard you talk about this in another, I don't know if it was with Corey and Tom, or if this was when you were on with Pablo and Cole and Matt Jones, but did you come up with the idea of the status report for the various characters? I was going through that again last night, looking at all of those, and I love that feature. And again, I think I heard you talking about that a bit. Am I right, Dan, or am I not remembering correctly here?
No, a lot of people have said how much they like that feature. No, but on every page for characters, there are certain kind of key profiles. It's almost like a baseball card for each member of the Star Wars universe that's featured in this book, the Star Wars book. And so that was one of the categories that was presented, that, hey, these are one of the ones that we want you to address. But they never told us what to say or how to say. And that's the great thing about working with Disney and Lucasfilm and DK, is that certainly there are certain things, and you're not going to just make stuff up that doesn't exist. But there's a rich, rich lore out there, through comics, through interviews, through books, through novels, through the Clone Wars, Rebels, and all the incredible films, things that George and Dave have said over the years, etc. So it's all there, but so they had to kind of figure out what are the key things that if you're just learning about these characters for the first time, or that you really kind of want to brush up on, what are the key things that we need to know about? So that was when I was excited to talk about it. That whole thing of one with the Force, that was just something I came up with for a lot of the people that are Jedi. And I decided that I don't know how else to explain it other than, they're one with the Force, and that leaves it kind of open, whether they're a part of the living Force or they are just passed on and they're just part of life, because the Force, is created by all living things, and you just become part of that anyway. So I just feel like that was kind of a good open-ended way to explain it.
I loved it. I'm glad you did that.
Wonderful.
Aaron, you got a question?
Well, you were talking about the creative process and everything when it came to, and I liked how you described it, almost like a baseball card for each character, because essentially is what it is. I love that feature, as apparently a lot of people do. But going into each of these articles, there's a lot of detail and there's a lot of information in there. When it came to gathering that information and collaborating with Pablo and Cole and even working with Matt, what was that entire process like? I mean, because I can imagine, because a lot of writers have gig. What's the right word? Almost like a brain freeze. Writer's block. There we go. Yeah, that was it. Writer's block. As soon as I said brain freeze, writer's block came in. It's like word block. But were you all able to communicate back and forth to work through stuff like that? Or if you had questions about the material that you were writing, were you able to talk to them to work through those questions and during that creative process?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, certainly, writing something like this, having access to Lucasfilm and the great minds in Cole and Pablo and Matt, who's, again, such an invaluable resource. It can't be emphasized enough how important Matt Jones is to this process, because he's almost like our Yoda. And, you're talking about Pablo Hidalgo and Cole Horton. They're both obviously extremely experienced and knowledgeable Star Wars guys, especially Pablo, who's been in Lucasfilm for over 25 years. So it was great because if there were any things that you weren't sure about, as far as what to include or what of all these things should I leave out, it was just great to be able to interact with them about that. And I've already known I just met Matt through this book. After them, we're going to be lifelong friends. I've known Pablo and Cole for years, so that was really cool. But I don't think I ever really had writer's block, because you don't have time. I mean, you literally had 6 or 7 weeks to get it done. And, the rest of my life didn't slow down or stop while I was working on this. And I was also very, very aware that, look, this is my first chance to write a Star Wars book. It's something I've wanted my entire life. I'm not missing that deadline for anything. So when it was time to buckle down, I just made it happen. And when there were times I was stumped about something, I have found that one of the best ways to avoid writer's block, and aspiring writers and students out there listening, the best thing to do is to write anyway. Get your ideas on paper. I think really good writing means you're going to take a paragraph from 4 down and move it to the top. Maybe take a sentence from this one and move it down to this paragraph. I mean, it's almost like a constant dance. It's like this very symbiotic process where everything can work together. But there are no bad ideas. I mean, George Lucas is perfect for that, because how many things from Star Wars now, even, that was all the way back in the late 70s that Ralph McQuarrie helped design those spiders that were supposed to be in The Empire Strikes Back, and they show up in chapter 10 of The Mandalorian. So there are no bad ideas. You just got to get them on paper, get them out there. Some stuff will stick, some won't. But you just have to trust the process, trust that you've been hired to do a job for a reason, and just let your creativity and your passion fly. And then good things will happen.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Dan. I admit that I'm stealing this from you, Dan, because you'd asked Cole and Pablo this, and you even asked it of yourself. You talked about cutting down what you'd written and having to learn more about crime and the underworld of Star Wars and how that was a challenge for you. Um, I guess my follow up to that would be were there other big challenges that you faced as you had these sections given to you by Matt Jones? I definitely wanted to follow up on that a little bit more on what were some of the biggest challenges you faced in writing.
I mean, honestly, the biggest challenges in writing for me was trying to figure out what do I not want to overstate? What has been said a million times, or where do I want to get not too foggy? I mean, when I was writing about Leia, Han Solo is obviously an important part of her life, but he's not part and parcel of her. He's an aspect of her. So I had to make sure that I made sure this was a Leia story, just like I said with Anakin. If you're writing about Anakin, yes, Obi-Wan's a part of it, but this is Anakin's story. When you're writing about Obi-Wan, yes, Anakin is a part of it, as is Luke, as is a lot of other characters, but it's really about Obi-Wan. So whatever character you're writing about, that's who you have to focus on, and that's what you have to make it about. And when it comes to the movies and some of the core characters, I know them like the back of my hand. But some of the stuff with the crime that you mentioned, the Darth Maul timeline is very convoluted and very tricky. So I really had to relook at those episodes in Rebels and Clone Wars again. I had to read the Darth Maul Son of Dathomir comic book again. I had to look at different things about him or maybe check in about different aspects or how maybe things linked together. So that was a good challenge because if it didn't immediately come to my mind, like A New Hope, I mean, I'm sure the three of us probably know beat by beat, sound effect, music, everything about that movie. But there are some episodes of the Clone Wars or Rebels that while we love them, they don't immediately come to mind, just like some of the ones that are so classically ensconced in our memory. So that was some of the challenge there, but it's really more about using my time properly and, having written for years and being a teacher of writing, I've learned the different obstacles that we can put in our own way when it comes to writing or creating. And I just tried to make sure to steer out of those. I mean, some people had said to me, wasn't it intimidating or like daunting that you were doing this because you're contributing to Star Wars canon? And honestly, no, it makes me super fired up and excited. Like I'd write another book right now. I'd just start right away because I love it. I feel like, and I know I've said this in other interviews too, so I apologize. But Lou Piniella once said, pressure is for people who aren't prepared. And I feel like I'm prepared because, and this is for all of you, and you two are perfect examples of this in your family and in your life as podcasters and Star Wars fans. If you want something bad enough, you can make it happen by working hard and never apologizing for who you are and just letting the chips fall where they're made, just trusting in the process, trusting that you have something to provide and to offer, and just letting that process work through you. And it's very, very exciting. I mean, these are the kind of things that fill me up and get me fired up. I mean, I love them. I mean, I get really bored and restless easily. So this is a really, really good thing for me because I like the process. I believe in what I'm doing. And it sounds like it's getting people excited and talking about Star Wars in a positive way, which really is a very, very key thing for me.
Well said.
Thank you.
Well said. It's kind of hard to follow that up because that was so good. But we do want to wrap up our discussion of your book. But I do want to ask you one more question here about it. Looking at everything you did and your experience in writing this book, and everything that's gone into it, and everything that has happened, and everybody you've been able to talk to and work with, looking at the experience as a whole, what would you say was your fondest memory of this entire process and this entire journey you've been on?
Ooh, that's a real. No one's asked me that yet. I don't think that's a great question. Getting the initial email was pretty wonderful. Telling my wife was very special. We had one book signing at a local coffee shop here, where Mason sat next to me. He's my 7-year-old son, and he sat next to me, and a couple people had him sign their books too. It kind of gets me choked up thinking about, because he was just so proud of me, but he was just so happy. And I hope things like this inspire him or inspire people to follow their dreams and just unabashedly, be yourself and not apologize for who you are. I mean, I remember as a kid, of course, always being a Star Wars fan, and I remember, even in 5th grade, having Star Wars notebooks, and all the other kids didn't. They had more like grown-up stuff in their minds, and I was like the Star Wars kid, but I never apologized for that. I was always just, this is what I like. This is who I am. And look, Star Wars ended up being cool, and look at all the things it's done for me and my family. And that's very, very special to me. So there's a lot of great things, but maybe a very, very key moment, and I've been very blessed that there have been a lot of them. When I got an advanced copy of the book, it was in this brown box from DK, and it had this pink slip on it that said, this is when the sale date is for this book. So I got it well in advance. So I opened it up with my son, my youngest son, and my wife, and I opened it, and no one said a word. I opened it, I held the book in my hand, and I just stared at it. And I opened it up because Tom Gross had said to me, is there ever a part you look at and you think, oh my gosh, I hope that part is still there? And yes, it's the part that has my name on it because I keep thinking, this is so special. I'm so glad and so blessed. God is so good for giving me this opportunity. So I looked at it, and I must have held it in my hands for about 30 to 45 seconds. I just smiled. And then my son and my wife hugged me, and the three of us kind of shared a group hug, and we said a little prayer together, thanking God for the opportunity. And it's something I will always treasure.
I love that. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. That is awesome. And everybody, if you have not got this book, you need to run out to your local bookstore or right now and pick it up, order it off. It's available on Amazon. The Star Wars book, it is definitely a must-have for Star Wars fans. And it is a must for your non-Star Wars fans if you want them to like Star Wars. This is a great way to get them up to speed on the saga. So pick it up, give it as Christmas gifts, birthdays, whatever. Pick it up. You won't go wrong with this book. So with that,
so much. Thank you so much for your great questions and for your interest in the book. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. We enjoyed the book, and definitely was something we wanted to discuss with you. And and it is definitely. I can't tell you how, knowing you as long as I can't tell you how overjoyed I have been for you through this whole thing. I've been so happy and so proud and it's been awesome for you. And I can't tell you, I still sit here and I'm still grinning ear to ear talking about you in this book because it still blows my mind. So
thank you. You guys are just very good people, and your friendship and support mean the world to me. It is true. There's a lot of good friends out there, but true, authentic friendship, with just pure out of selflessness and love is very special. So I thank you both for both of your friendships.
We thank you for yours, my friend. So with that, we still got a lot of show to do. We are going to be discussing the latest episode of The Mandalorian, which we'll call this episode the Ahsoka Show. It's going to be great. We're going to have fun. Dan's going to join us too. So we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Aaron and David here, joined by our guest, the legendary author and podcaster Dan Z. And we are going to jump into our review of the latest episode of The Mandalorian. This is chapter 13, The Jedi, which was released November 27th of 2020. Written by Dave Filoni, directed by Dave Filoni. I think we can all just agree Dave Filoni is the chosen one.
I think that guy's got a future.
I think he does. The future is bright for Dave Filoni, for sure.
It is.
So, the Jedi, of course, in this episode, Mando and the child make it to Corvus, as directed by Bo-Katan, in search of Ahsoka Tano. There they find an evil magistrate named Morgan Elsbeth, who is tormenting the villagers, hires Mando to go kill Ahsoka. Instead, he teams up with Ahsoka, meets Ahsoka, and they end up defeating the magistrate. That's your synopsis in a nutshell. That's your Cliff Note version. So let's jump right into this. Dan, you're our guest. We're going to start with you. What were your initial thoughts when you viewed this episode?
So this episode is challenging to me in a lot of ways. I wish that I could tell you that I didn't know. I mean, I had heard earlier in the week that the title was going to be the Jedi of this episode. So I instantly knew Ahsoka was going to be in it. I didn't want that reveal, and I got it early. So unfortunately, that was already very much in my mind. You guys know how I am about spoilers and anticipation, especially when it comes to Star Wars. So when it started, and I saw her right away, I didn't expect to see her as soon as I did. I've had a very, very hard time, and we talked about this before the show. I had a very hard time with it not being Ashley Eckstein, because Ashley Eckstein, I think, is a very special person, a very powerful person in fandom and in our culture, in the culture of popular culture. And she is so much the soul of Ahsoka Tano. So while I liked it, and I will still give the episode an A, I think it's an excellent episode. It's still something I'm kind of struggling with, because I feel like it sounds silly, guys, but I'm sure you'll agree with me. I feel like I feel so loyal to Ashley that it's almost hard for me to just fully embrace it. That being said, I thought Rosario Dawson was spectacular. I thought she did an excellent job. She's a very much a wonderful actor. She looked the part. Her mannerisms, the way she carried herself as Ahsoka Tano, even the way she folded her arms, or she would extend the gear knob to Grogu before he actually received it. Very much channeled her, but without Ashley Eckstein, there's still a piece of the puzzle missing for me.
Definitely can understand that. For me, when I first saw this, I felt a lot like you, Dan. I sat down, I watched it, and by the end of the episode, I was unimpressed. Everything felt, in my initial viewing, everything felt it was very anticlimactic. Like you, I had heard rumors that the episode was going to be called Jedi, which led to the assumption that this was going to be the Ahsoka episode. You couldn't go online without everybody talking about seeing Ahsoka on Friday. We're going to see Ahsoka Friday. It's going to be great. And apparently, come to find out after the fact, there was even somebody actually had leaked the plot, and the plot of the episode was actually out there a week early, which blew my mind. Especially as tight as Disney and Lucasfilm keep these things close to their vest, that it actually made it out. But I thought it was a good episode, but overall it didn't float my boat per se. I found it lacking in certain areas. The story to me felt a little weak. It's a story we've seen many times before. It was I thought Rosario did great. I love Ashley Eckstein. She is one of 3 people I credit with bringing me back in the fandom, and she will always be someone special to me because of that. But I didn't necessarily have an issue with her not playing Ahsoka. The voice was different, so that kind of threw me off for a little bit. But a lot of Rosario's mannerisms and everything matched the animated version. And there's always a little bit of difference between the animated version and the live action version. I look back at when they brought Saw Gerrera into Rebels. And we had just had Rogue One, and we had Forrest Whitaker playing him there. And then we got the transition into Rebels, and we get to see him there. And just there was you could tell they modeled it after him, but there was some difference. So I was the difference didn't bother me there. But I felt there was some weakness in the story. I felt that it felt like something that was a little forced to me. But I still thought it was a good episode. David, what were your initial reactions when you watched it?
Well, yeah, to piggyback off both of you guys, I think about, when Dan and Corey started Coffee with Kenobi, and the stance was going to be, no spoilers. And, when you and I joined, just like Dan was describing, when we met there at Disney World and the Magic Kingdom, and went from there in 2015, and you and I, Aaron, have always taken that stance. And then I think about, as we've started Star Wars Reactions, we've continued to have that stance. And I've mentioned this in previous episodes, is like, I think back to season 1, episode 1, and that reveal at the end of the child, right? And I think back over the summer, and I remember hearing all the rumors about Rosario Dawson playing Ahsoka. I remember hearing all the rumors. Again, we didn't talk about it. Dan didn't talk about it on Coffee with Kenobi, but you heard all this stuff about Katie Sackhoff coming in as Bo-Katan. And so unlike season 1, we saw all this coming. My biggest thing was, how great would it have been we get to that episode, and all of a sudden here comes the Mandalorians flying in to help Mando and Baby Yoda, and we don't even know that. What a great reveal that would have been. And the same thing here, where we get to this chapter 13, there's, no reveal like previous episodes. We don't know the title until it's shown, but this one, it was leaked. And could you imagine, we're watching it, and we have no clue that Rosario Dawson's going to play Ahsoka. We don't know that Dave Filoni's going to bring, Ahsoka into this. And boom, we see white lightsabers, and the response that would have had. I mean, same thing with Tamara Morrison. Like I said, Dan has said this a million times on Coffee with Kenobi. I absolutely echo it. I would have loved for none of us to know about Tem Morrison, Katie Sackhoff, and Rosario Dawson. So I just wanted to set the stage there. So that's a big one. And, I was curious to see how I would respond to Rosario as Ahsoka. I always wonder, is it baggage that we bring to Star Wars movies and shows? Do we call it expectations? On a more positive note, I was thinking, is it the love that we have for the actors and voice actors that have built that fan equity with us over the years? Like you said, Aaron, you've mentioned this before on our show about meeting Ashley at Star Wars weekends and how wonderful her and James Arnold Taylor were. I've got video of Eli up on stage with Ashley, standing right next to her, and her guiding him in a reading session. Tom Kane's on stage, James Arnold Taylor's up there, and here she is, loving on my son. And it was just one of the greatest Star Wars moments for me ever. Later on, when the Ahsoka novel came out, I took both of my children down to Orlando, Ashley's hometown. And there's Eli and Lena, and I got video of my kids with Ashley and E.K. Johnston. And she's just loving on my kids again. And so there's so much fan equity built up that, again, it was really hard for me not to see her as live action Ahsoka. I guess one of the things I'd written in the show notes here, I guess I don't know why she wasn't. I don't know the answer to that. I thought, they had a stunt double. I looked at the end credits. They had a stunt double doing all the lightsaber battles. So I don't know why the switch. All that being said, I enjoyed seeing the lightsabers, her white lightsabers. It was interesting to learn the child's name, Grogu. And for me, and Dan alluded to this a little bit earlier, as a psychologist, there is a lot of psychology in this episode. And a little bit later on, when I'm in my psychology corner, I'll talk more about PTSD, trauma, and parenting children who are anxious. So from that respect, all these episodes have made it very easy for me in producing this psychology corner. So I'm excited to discuss that in a little bit as well. But those are just some of my initial thoughts.
By the way, I love your segment. I love that you do that. I think that's really important. I do want to say really quickly, I do think that Well, I mean, the Ashley thing is certainly something I'm hung up on. What I really wish is that no one knew that Rosario Dawson was going to be in it. No one knew that Ahsoka Tano was going to show up, because can you imagine how we would have felt to suddenly see Ahsoka on there? I mean, there may have been even more hair pulling, because we were expecting to see Ashley, especially because Katie Sackhoff showed up a couple episodes before as Bo-Katan. So that, I think that makes you say, well, there's precedence there. Why aren't we doing this? But that being said, Star Wars had said it's best when you're being surprised. No, I am your father. Oh, look, that's looks like a baby Yoda at the end of chapter 1. Oh my gosh, there's Boba Fett's armor. Like, those payoffs, those surprises play so huge. And I feel like for people who didn't know it, the adrenaline carried them through that episode. And I worked with some people who have never seen Clone Wars or Rebels. They have no clue who Ahsoka is. And they loved her. They were instantly captivated by her. How exciting and important to see a female lead Jedi carry an episode. The fact that we got to see 2 females with the big duel at the end. And probably most importantly, guys, and we can all relate to this, how nice to finally, after 43 years, see something Star Wars that shows a positive portrayal of the father and son dynamic. We've never seen that in Star Wars, and we finally have it with the child in The Mandalorian.
Absolutely. It's this show has been incredible for the saga as a whole. When it comes to the Mandalorian as a whole, it's been incredible contribution to the saga, and seeing what we've seen in these shows has been just phenomenal with getting to know the child and all these stories continuing, and they did it for so long, and it had, and I think one thing that bothered me with this particular episode is we went all of the first season and most of this season with very little influence from the main story of the saga, the Skywalker story. I mean, we had Bo-Katan show up 2 episodes ago. That's fine. Bo-Katan is a great character. I love the character. I love Katie Sackhoff. She's a tremendous actress. But to me, she's one of those B-level background characters. We never had an influence of the A-level characters coming into this show, and it was so good, and it carried its own. And then we injected Ahsoka. I love Ahsoka. Don't get me wrong. I love Ahsoka. But I think the injection of Ahsoka into the episode, and not in a introductory way where he meets her at some point in the episode, just opening the episode with her, just kind of changed the dynamic of this particular episode compared to all the ones we had seen before. And I think that's one of the things I did not like. Well, I don't want to say I didn't like. One of the things that struck me wrong with the episode.
And you and I kind of texted about that a little bit, I think, on Friday, because of those things. I do hope, and I feel like this has been happening almost the entire season, that a lot of this is about, as we've said, the Mandalorian and sidekick. And I really want to make sure that the focus continues to be squarely on the Mandalorian, with fun world building and fun extra stuff to expand the saga. But at its core, this is a story about the Mandalorian, and well, I do hope we get to see Ahsoka again, and Bo-Katan again, and other characters again. I hope that it always, it was all started with a mouse. This time it was all started with the Mandalorian.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that, because everybody knows I'm a huge Rebels fan. I love Rebels.
Still my favorite thing.
Oh, it's a tremendous show. But when we were going through the first season, it was, I struggle, and I'm literally in the middle of rewatching the first season right now, but for like the 400th time. But the show itself, the first season was filled with so many cameos and guests. You had Lando, you had R2 and 3PO, you had Bail Organa. I mean, there were so many cameos in there. It was almost like they were throwing all these big name characters in there to raise the show when they didn't give the crew a chance to carry the show. And when they step back, exactly. And it distracted, it took away from the main characters and from the story. And I think once they stepped back and stopped doing that, the show really picked up and ran. And we've had Bo, we've had Ahsoka, and I'm hoping we're not starting to see a trend in The Mandalorian that's going to carry that, change the direction of the show. I love seeing these characters, but I love seeing Mando and the child more.
Yep, well said. And I don't think that we will. I think this is just setting up the future of the Star Wars franchise in a lot of different ways. But I totally empathize with what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. I got a feeling. I think we're on the same wavelength there. It is setting up the future of the Star Wars franchise, and I think down the road, a few episodes and some time, we'll actually be able to look back and see how this flows into the future. One thing I've always said, and David can vouch for me all the years I've been podcasting, especially when it comes to Dave Filoni. With Dave Filoni, there's never anything such as a filler episode.
That's right.
Everything he does has a reason. Whether you find out in that episode, you find out in the next episode, or you find out 2 seasons from now. Everything has its purpose and its reason for being done. And that's the same thing with this episode. They would not have done this just for fan service, which I could see a lot of people thinking that. There's got to be a purpose to it. And the more I'll admit, the more I've watched this episode through the weekend and today, the more I've enjoyed the episode. And I got a feeling the more information we get down the road, the more I'll be able to look back and say, you know what, this was a really great episode.
And honestly, if Grogu is in the story at this time, he better run into Ahsoka at some point. They're two of the most powerful Force entities in the galaxy. They better cross paths at some point, or I think we'd feel cheated. I would.
Absolutely. It definitely is something that I believe needed to happen and should have happened, and I just don't know if it should have happened. I sound like one of those angry fanboys. I don't think it should have happened this way, but I don't know.
I totally understand.
David?
No, it's I guess we've said it. I have watched it a few more times. I do want to echo what Dan said about Rosario, because there was times, and I've even looked at StarWars.com and looking at the stills, and they put that Mando Monday on, and you can look at some of the stills from the episode and look at the concept art at the end of the episode. There are several times where the way that they filmed Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka, like almost from the side, and she's smiling, I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks just like the animated Ahsoka, just brilliant. And so it was she does a great job, she really does. I want to say that, and she's someone who wanted this for a long time, and she was a big fan of Star Wars, and it's wonderful to see. And so, like I said, there was just a few times where you see her and she looks a certain way, or smiles, or walks, and she really does seem like Ahsoka. And I think about the first time we see Ahsoka is in the Clone Wars 2008 movie, and she's saying snips and Sky Guy and all that, and we look all the way now to this end, and she is a more calm, quiet, stoic user of the Force and stuff. And so one thing I was wondering is why do they call it the Jedi? Because is she kind of moving back to being a Jedi? Because she says, I'm no Jedi. Anyways, that's just a question I have. I was curious, about that. But maybe she's coming back around to that kind of wavelength and stuff. But
I don't.
Oh, go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
Well, no, Aaron, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
To me, being a Jedi is almost like a club. Like the term Jedi, suddenly by this point in the franchise or in the galaxy, is more like a just sort of a badge that people have. But so many of the Jedi don't actually deserve that title as far as what it means to be selfless, to not want power, to want to build other people up, to make the galaxy a better place, and to serve the greater good and not some rules or some dogma, as Palpatine says, that may not be thinking about what actually matters to people and what does. And sometimes the Jedi, one of their great faults to me is that they forget about empathy, and they're more concerned about other things. And Dave Filoni says this in an interview with Anthony Bresnikan that debuted on Vanity Fair this week. And he says, to me, this is not verbatim, but I feel this way as well. Ahsoka is probably more Jedi than a lot of the Jedi because she has all these opportunities to do things, but she instead chooses what's for the greater good. She's incredibly selfless. She doesn't want power. She wants to help people more so than just about any Jedi, except for maybe Qui-Gon Jinn and Rey. And I think the reason she doesn't shudder from the term Jedi is while she may not be a part of the Jedi Order officially, the Jedi Order is done. She is carrying on that mantra and that legacy better than just about anybody could. So that's why, to me, she is the Jedi.
Nice.
Very good. Very good. I definitely agree. Now, move on because I know we're running out of time here. But the other thing I want to make sure we hit on, of course, is the reveal of the child's name. We've all been calling him by his name tonight, Grogu. I got to know, when you heard the name Grogu, what did you think of that name, David?
Well, I think I responded like the Mandalorian. What? What is it? And I had to play it back, and on Disney Plus when I played it back, then it gave me the closed captioning. I don't typically watch it with that, and so I could see Ahsoka say Grogu, and I said okay, and then I think one of the first things I thought about was Groot, from the Marvel franchise and stuff like that. But I think it's growing on me. I don't know. I think I was thinking about Yoda, Yaddle, and I thought maybe another Y word, but I think Grogu is gonna grow on me.
Very good, very good. Dan, what did you think of Grogu?
Honestly, what my favorite thing about it is the way it was revealed through a very positive, intimate conversation that the two have as Force wielders, as Force users, where they're just sitting on this mountain, almost like a mountaintop experience. Even the lighting is different in this sequence. And Ahsoka's just smiling, and the child is just very animated and expressive. And there's all these beautiful squeaks and squawks, and the puppetry on this section is just phenomenal. And then it's just very said organically and through the power of story. And every time Din Djarin says Grogu, the way that the child lights up, it just almost gets you choked up because he's feeling love for who he is. And it's not a name that has been bestowed upon him, but it is a name that he has, and he finally is able to share it because he couldn't communicate with the Mandalorian in the way the Mandalorian is used to. But it was still there. So does the name roll off the tongue? No. I mean, but did Yoda when it came out in 1980? I don't know. That was a long time ago. That was 40 years ago. So really, this is the kind of thing where we're victims of the success of Star Wars because nothing can live up to the anticipation of what we think a name might be. I would have been fine calling him the child for the rest of my life. But a name is extremely important culturally and identity-wise, and it creates and establishes family. So the fact that he already has a name, he gets to share it, gives him a little bit more gravitas, and I'm sure eventually I'll get used to it. And, it is definitely something I'm not used to, and it's hard not to say the child, but my son Mason keeps correcting me every 5 seconds, so I'm going to have to.
Love it. Love Mason, man. Love it. It came as a surprise to me. I love how they revealed it, and like you said, I love how they revealed Grogu's name, and I love how they revealed his backstory too, which was absolutely mind blowing. This kid was this child was in the temple, during the fall of during Order 66. He was in the temple, and somebody snuck him away. I can't imagine. I want to know who snuck this kid out of the temple.
I know. We need a flashback.
Yes, we do. And it is the fact that he was there, and he survived the temple at Order 66 it was mind blowing to me. But I will say this: people could call him Grogu all he wants. He will always be a doy to me. I've called him a doy since day one. He will always be a doy to me. And for those of you that haven't figured that out, a doy is Yoda spelled backwards.
Dan, I'm sorry. He's been saying this for a long time.
I know. I love it. Oh, I'm a listener. I know.
All right. Well, we love you. I'm just sorry sometimes.
Oh, okay. Well, we are running out of time here with Dan, so we want to go ahead and wrap things up with our final thoughts. Dan, what are your final thoughts on Chapter 13, The Jedi?
I think it's an important, powerful episode with a lot of connecting tissue to a lot of aspects of Star Wars. And despite my challenges in my maybe unusual sense of loyalty to Ashley Eckstein, she's a professional and an adult, and she knows that this is a business, and she's been nothing but full of grace and dignity and class, and she'll always be Ahsoka to us. But seeing Ahsoka on screen, I couldn't take my eyes off her. Very much like Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. Even though Ashley is my Ahsoka, I thought Rosario channeled a certain aspect of Ahsoka Tano that was completely mesmerizing. And if this allows for the entire world to know about Ahsoka, what those of us do who love Star Wars, the Clone Wars, and Star Wars Rebels, then I am here for it.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. David, final thoughts?
Yeah, as with other episodes that have a lot to unpack, I'll struggle to initially enjoy them. But like I mentioned a few minutes ago, with the subsequent viewings and processing, I do like this episode. And of course, like you said, Aaron, the expression and description of his backstory there at the temple is so full of rich psychological material. It's just outstanding. And so I very much enjoyed that. I love seeing Mando. I love seeing the child interact. And I guess we didn't even talk about Thrawn. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that in time. But I loved hearing that. And I have to admit, it was really neat to see lightsabers go against a Beskar spike. That was pretty cool, how that was all set up. Love some of the Easter eggs in this one. Tython, right, is from the EU, some of the Bane novels, and also from Dr. Aphra number 40. A deep cut in this episode was those HK droids, those hunter killer droids that we see helping to hunt down Ahsoka and Mando. They have Thrawn's 7th Fleet insignia on the side of their heads. I didn't really see that at first, but I give credit to Paul Bateman for that, a big Ralph McQuarrie fan, and he pointed it out, and I saw that on Twitter. So I'm stealing it from Paul, but I'm crediting him because I know as a psychologist you don't ever plagiarize. But I thought that was pretty cool to see that insignia there. Also, I'm sure both of you saw it. We see Morai, right, the convoy.
That's right.
Right,
Yep,
we see it real quick. If you don't catch it, if you blink, you missed it. And it was in it last night. I grabbed Dan's Star Wars book. I opened it up, and right there's Morai, and it's thought to be a manifestation of a daughter in the mortal realm. So there's where Dan's book gave a nice description of Morai. But it was really neat to see the convoy in this episode as well.
By the way, did you guys notice that Ahsoka's belt buckle is the World Between Worlds portal?
No.
Yeah.
You did?
Yes, I noticed that.
Oh,
I was going to bring that up in my closing thoughts too.
Yeah.
awesome.
Edit me out and you say it. Yeah.
No, it's perfect. That's perfect. Oh no, this episode, like I said, my closing thoughts, I had a rough time when I initially watched it, and the more I watched it, the more I caught stuff that I didn't catch before. Like that belt buckle, which I actually caught on my watch today, and I just hadn't had a chance to text you, David, to point that out. But it was little things like that with more things that go back to other parts of the saga, to Rebels, and so on. The mention of Grand Admiral Thrawn, those were things that actually excited me. And actually, the more I watched, the more it's helping me get over some of my earlier objections. Honestly, if I don't know if Dan, if you remember, or even you, David, if you remember the first time when we talked about Rogue One. And when it first came out, I couldn't stand the movie. I did not like it.
I do remember this.
I do too. I do too.
And since then, the more I watched it, I did not like it when it came out. Then it was released, and of course, I bought on Blu-ray and everything, and I bought it then just because it's a Star Wars movie. I got to have them all. It's like Pokemon; you got to catch them all. And I got it, and I watched it again, and I've kept watching it, and I kept watching it, and I kept watching it. And now it's one of my favorites movies there. And it's just a matter of, it was so different than what we were used to. It threw me off, and in all aspects of the movie did. And this did too. This episode did. Because even if you go through it and listen, even the music is different than the episodes previously. Ludwig did a great job, but the music is just very different than some of the previous episodes we had been getting, and it's a little more orchestral, like we've gotten with Clone Wars and stuff, and Rebels. And it was a good soundtrack, but it threw me off and threw off the rest of the episode. So the more I watched it, the more I enjoyed this episode, and I got a feeling the more I'm going to enjoy it, the more down the road we get. So that brings us to our grade. Of course, everybody knows we grade each episode, just like if you were getting a grade in school. And Dan's good at giving grades, A, B, C, D, or F. For me, I'll go first. Initially, I was going to give this episode based on my first viewing after I first watched it, and I sat down. I'm thinking, this is going to be an easy B- for me. But the more I've watched it, and the more I've watched it and got into it and started breaking down and getting past some of my objections to it, I'm actually bumping it up a full grade to an A- for me, because there is a lot in this to go through. It was still a full story. It was still a good story. And I just can't wait. I want to see where they take it, and that's really what I'm waiting on right now, is to see where this goes. David, how about you, my friend? How would you grade this episode?
My grading was all over the place. I've vacillated. I've gone back and forth. I don't know. I think I'm channeling Tom Gross. I think one time he said, "I reserve the right to change my grade," or something like that. I thought we did that one time. Didn't he, Dan? I am taking a page from Tom Gross's book, and right now I've landed on a B+. I think it's because of, again, Ashley Eckstein, how I feel about her, how I've seen her interact with my children, and then in watching her voice that character since 2008. I think it's still there. I wonder in time if I'll get up there to an A-, maybe an A or something like that, particularly with these additional episodes. And I'm curious to see what Dave Filoni will do with it. So B+ for now, and probably going to go up.
Very good. Very good. Dan, how would you grade her?
It's an A. It's definitely an A. I mean, even the things that hold me back, it still is tied into passion and being very closely invested in the story and these characters. the way it's shot, the way it's lit, the makeup, the puppetry, the music is gorgeous. The impact it has on the franchise, how it ties so many things together, the fact that Ahsoka is so mesmerizing, the connection between Din Djarin and Grogu, and the implications of the father-son dynamic make this a strong A for me.
Very good. Very good. So, of course, let us know what you thought of the episode. You can actually let us know via social media, Facebook, Star Wars Reactions, Twitter, SW Reactions Pod, or, of course, Instagram, which is SW Reactions. We did get a few people who actually jumped in and told us what they thought about the episode, which was awesome. We got, where did they go? There they are. Our pal Cameron Ramos actually stated that the double lightsabers looked amazing in live action. I was nervous of how Ahsoka costume would look while fighting in live action, but it looked amazing, and Rosario was a fantastic addition to Team Tano. Dave killed it with the directing on this episode. Tons of fun, and we learned a lot. Tyler Overstreet actually said it was amazing, and in capital letters he yelled at Grogu.
Nice.
Then, of course, my pal Robbie Marcano, of course, just said 3 words: it is fantastic. So, some great feedback there on the episode. Let us know what you think. Dan, my friend, this has been awesome. I know we've taken up a lot of your time, and we appreciate it. If people want to talk Star Wars with you, how would they go about doing that?
Well, Aaron and David, thank you both so much. It's been so fun. This is legitimately this is why we started Coffee with Kenobi. This is the kind of conversations you have with your friends when you're talking Star Wars. So thank you both so much. Star Wars Reactions is a true delight when it pops up on my podcast feed, so keep up the great work. If you want to hear more from me, you can certainly chat with me on Twitter at Mr. Zer, MRZEHR. You can email me, danz@coffeewithkenobi.com. And you can find Coffee with Kenobi twice a week. You can find it on the podcast, wherever you find podcasts naturally. And then every Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live, you can interact with me directly, and I'll share your thoughts. We usually do top 5s. We've been going through top 5s of different episodes of The Mandalorian. We look at different characters, music, all kinds of great stuff in the world of Star Wars. You can find Coffee with Kenobi all over social media. We do have a Patreon page where you can become a member of the CWK Alliance, where we have an exclusive weekly podcast, CWK Prover, hosted by myself, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb. We laugh so hard. We talk about Star Wars, pop culture, behind the scenes of the show, Christmas, Thanksgiving, you name it, we talk about it. And then you can certainly find my writing on stars.com and occasionally on IGN. And if you have a podcast or blog and want to take that next step and build your brand, or you just want to get started, you can reach out to me at danzmedia.com, and I will help you take that first step into a larger world.
Very cool. Very cool. And we will have all of those links in our show notes, so you can make it easy to locate Dan for you.
I apologize in advance. That's a lot.
Hey, it's fine. We'll take it. We'll add them to the show notes so you can check Dan out. And if you're not, follow him. He is a brilliant mind in the Star Wars community, and the nicest guy you'll ever meet. So,
Thank you so much.
So thank you, Dan, for joining us. We appreciate it. You're the best. Everybody, hang out. We will be right back with Dave's Psychology Corner. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Aaron and David here. We want to thank Dan again for joining us for our review and to talk about his book, the Star Wars book. But right now, I'm going to turn things over to David, because we have a full Psychology Corner for you tonight. David, take it away.
That's right, buddy. You know, we're gonna get our listeners basically to a master's degree and maybe even to an honorary doctorate tonight, a PhD. We're gonna really give them a lot. They're like I mentioned earlier when we were recording with Dan, there is so much rich psychological material in this episode, and in particular the discussions between Ahsoka and Grogu. So one of the things I want to start with is just talking about, and you see it in Mando in this episode, and we've seen it in other episodes, how parenting can be incredibly frustrating. We see Mando's frustration with Grogu when he won't grab the rock from his hand. And if our listeners remember, Mando even says he's stubborn. He says that to Ahsoka. And as humans, we want people to work with us, not against us. This is especially the case with our children. And unfortunately, and I've done this work for years and years and years, a number of factors can lead to difficulties in parenting. One of the most straightforward things I've said to many parents in my office over the years is you will parent better if you, A, have a good night's sleep, B, have food in your belly, and C, you've gone to the bathroom, right? I've talked to so many parents, right? If you have to go to the bathroom, you're hungry, you haven't had a good night's sleep, your patience is not there, you will not look like a stellar parent at those times. So just a parent's physical needs, our physiology can quickly affect how we parent. Now, if we flip over to children, and this is where I want to get to with Grogu, and what Ahsoka talks about in this episode, is that children can also negatively affect parenting. For example, learning disabilities. There's a number of learning disabilities, 3 in particular, that can really affect kids pretty drastically. Reading disorder, mathematics disorder, and disorder of written expression. It can really negatively affect a kid in class. Physical handicaps, ADHD. I've worked with tons of moms and dads whose kids have ADHD. Very difficult. And then, of course, depression and anxiety disorders. These can affect parenting. So not only issues with the parent, but issues with the child. And now to tie it into this episode, we learn that that Grogu has most likely been traumatized. In my show notes here, I said perhaps he saw Anakin at the Jedi Temple during Order 66. Did he see that happen? I mean, we know that Yoda and Obi-Wan watched the playback, right? We see that in episode 3. But I'm very curious about that. In psychology, let's say if he did see that, we would say that the child or Grogu has PTSD, or what's more commonly known as post-traumatic stress disorder. It used to be called shell shock back, I think, at the end of World War I, World War II. But let's make our listeners good psychologists. This is what I talk about with my clients all the time. In a session, there's 3 things. 1, safe place to vent. Number 2, they're always supported in my office. And number 3, the men and women who educated me constantly said, make your clients good psychologists. So we're going to do that by going over some of the criteria for PTSD. They're pretty extensive. I can't go through all of them. It would take too much time. But I'll give you some of them just so you got a feel for it. And this is from the DSM. The DSM is a diagnostic and statistical manual. It's used by psychiatrists, clinical psychologists like myself, licensed clinical social workers, psychiatric nurses, and so on. But the DSM is what's used. So we'll go over some of those criteria because I want you to know that, especially when we think about Grogu going forward. I want to talk a little bit about how PTSD is affecting the child and why he's been acting this way. I finally am getting this, particularly when he's 50 years old. And also how PTSD and anxiety overall is affecting Mando's parenting, right? Because that's what we said. This is the overarching theme. So let me quickly talk to you a bit about the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, again, this is pretty extensive, but let me give you some here to our listeners. The first thing that we look for is, has that adult or child had exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in some way? And part of this is it can happen to us, or if we see it happen to someone else. So one of the examples, Aaron, that I give to people is if I see a car accident and someone's almost killed, but they're not killed, I mean, it could be inducing trauma in me. If the person is killed, if you see that, it can do that. And a lot of times people think about, this actual threatened death is just military. Now, I've worked with quite a few military men and women over the years. Now, more recently, obviously, it's women as well have gone to Afghanistan and Iraq. And so I've worked with them here where I live in Central Florida. I've worked with a number of county sheriffs and police officers who have also experienced it. Of course, it doesn't have to just be police officers or military men and women, but if someone is raped or hurt in that way, that can lead to trauma. So that's one of the first big areas. Another major area of symptoms for PTSD is the presence of intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic event. For example, recurrent distressing dreams, intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal external cues that cue us in and remind us of that traumatic event. Okay. There's persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with a traumatic event, and it begins after that traumatic event's occurred. I've talked to men and women, they avoid memories, thoughts, feelings about that traumatic event. They'll avoid external reminders like people, places, conversations, activities, objects, situations that arouse distressing memories and thoughts in them. Another big area of PTSD symptomatology is negative alterations in thoughts and mood. Okay. So, for example, in terms of cognitive issues, there's that inability to remember important aspects of the traumatic event, right? There's that blocking that people have. Sometimes we have persistent negative emotional states in people with trauma, fear, right? Ahsoka says she senses great fear in Grogu. We can also see horror and anger, guilt and shame. Another big area is marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic events. For example, irritable behavior and angry outbursts. We can see reckless or self-destructive behavior, exaggerated startle responses, right? And so on and so forth. So that is giving you a flavor. And I went through those pretty quickly, and I didn't go over every single criteria for you, but I wanted to give you a flavor of that. Now, think about this. When we talk about PTSD's effects on the child, so we learned from Ahsoka that Grogu has trained under a number of masters at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. And when we look at Grogu's behaviors over the last season and so far this season, we clearly see regression in his behaviors, right, in his speech. And I didn't quite understand that, right? And he's 50 years old, and of course, I guess we don't fully know how Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu develop and so on and so forth. But I was looking at the DSM-5, and I knew I wanted to bring it home, and I want to read this to you. This section here is called Associated Features Supporting the Diagnosis. And it says, we see developmental regression, such as the loss of language in young children, right? That's pretty common when we see that. And so I want to make sure I shared that, tonight in this psychology corner, because, we definitely see that in his behaviors. It'd be interesting to see as the season progresses and next season, if we'll see a return of understandable speech, right? Yoda, even though Yoda talks backward, we understand Yoda. So that'll be interesting. The last part of the psychology corner here, I wanted to talk about after the PTSD criteria and the effect of PTSD on the child is the effects of PTA on Mando and us as parents. And when we have children who have an LD, a learning disability, ADHD, and in this case, anxiety or severe trauma in Grogu, parenting is made exponentially more difficult. I'll give you an example here. And I remember this in the fall of 1992. And one of my major professors, Dr. Douglas Barnett, was talking about parenting interactions per day for easy versus difficult children. And he put a diagram on the board, and he showed that, for parents who have kids who don't have a learning disability, are not traumatized, don't have ADHD, these are kids who are doing pretty well cognitively and emotionally. Moms and dads have to, kind of correct that child, that boy or girl, about 15 times per day. And if you break that down, that's about 1 time per hour over maybe 12 hours of being awake or so. That is pretty easy on parents. what we see in kids who have difficult temperaments or have a learning disability or ADHD and so on and so forth, or even this trauma, is it's a lot more parenting, upwards of 45 interactions per day. I've talked to countless moms and dads in my office who are wiped out because, and particularly parents who have more than one child, you have an easy temperament kid, you have a difficult temperament. The one with the difficult temperament or issues just requires so much more correcting and parenting and so on and so forth. And so to tie this again more closely with Grogu and what we see in Mando in this episode is that with them, it does require more parenting, more patience, and more assurance. We do see the Mandalorian not only express his frustration with Grogu not taking the rock, but Mando even immediately tells Ahsoka, he's stubborn. Knowing that Grogu is suffering with anxiety, it's most likely not stubbornness, but anxiety. And I've seen this in a lot of adults, and I've seen it in children as well, where you think, are they mad at me? Are they stubborn? Do they not like me? But then when you talk to them, you learn that they're very anxious. I also wanted to put a quick note in here to our listeners, because I see this all the time in my office, is it tends to be easier to be understanding of others, like non-family members who have anxiety or depression. And I found that the individuals in my office who have family members with anxiety and depression, they tend to struggle more. Why is this? And going back to what I mentioned about Mando and Grogu, it wears people down. And I'm not blaming the person with depression or anxiety. It's very difficult. It's difficult for the person with depression and anxiety, and it's difficult for their family members, not just parents, but other loved ones. I just want to finish out the psychology corner by saying that, patience and persistence is key. It's not easy to parent in general. It's even harder when other psychological or learning issues are there. And I always encourage people to seek out a psychologist, to help that mom and dad, to help those parents, to help those kids. And because to have that kind of help really helps parents. I've helped many parents not pull all the hair out of their head over the years. So again, incredibly rich psychological material here from Ahsoka, from Grogu, and I can't wait to talk about this more in these next, what do we have left? If this is 13, and we're going to go to 16, right? We got 3 more episodes. So
3 more.
So there you go. Yeah. And I think too, Aaron, I'm very curious to see how, these psychological issues and this trauma play into season 3.
Yeah, that will be very interesting to see how it plays out going forward. And that definitely, David, I love these segments. I got to tell you that.
Oh man. Well, I appreciate you saying that. Dan's saying it too. Like you said, we've gotten feedback from some of our listeners about it, and I hope it really does make it unique, because there's so many podcasts out there that I thought it was time to really share this with clients, and it's so fun to do it, Aaron. Talking with you and I have such a love of Star Wars and of course of psychology. This episode was just wow. It just was so rich. And but thank you, brother, for saying that. I appreciate it, man.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. And of course, I lost my train of thought. Carabast.
You got Carabast in there. We have to every episode.
Every episode. There's always one.
That's right.
Whether we include it or not, it's another story. Awesome. Well, with that wraps up our show today. David, if people want to talk Star Wars with you, or even talk about the psychology corner, how would they go about doing that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no lack of Star Wars to talk about, no lack of psychology to talk about. Same as always. It's always been the same, 2 places. The Twitter is at David_Motters. And of course, our email. Mine is my first name, David, at StarWarsReactions.com.
Very good. And of course, if you do want to talk Star Wars with me, best place to do that is Twitter at TAHarris121079. Or, of course, you can always email me, Aaron, at StarWarsReactions.com. You can talk to me about the Psychology Corner, but I probably would not be the person to do that with, because I'll probably turn it back to Star Wars or hockey. So that's just me. So, so perfect. David, my friend, this has been awesome as always.
Well, I agree, man. To get Dan on, we've been wanting to do it for quite a long time, actually. And so we were able to work it out. Thank you for making all the effort there to make it happen. And thank you, Dan, for being on. And this was a big one, buddy.
It definitely was, definitely is. And we want to thank everybody for listening. We appreciate each and every one of you. Y'all are the best. We are grateful for you. We're thankful for you. And pray for y'all as well. Wish y'all the best. Thank you for listening in. This is your place for elegant discussion for a more civilized age.
If you'd like to share your thoughts, you can email us at show@starwarsreactions.com for our show notes and the latest news from the Star Wars universe. Visit our website at www.starwarsreactions.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at SWReactionsPod or on Facebook at Star Wars Reactions. If you enjoy our show, please leave a review on iTunes. This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or by Lucasfilm Limited. It's intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars. All names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and the respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Star Wars Reactions unless otherwise indicated. Star Wars Reactions. Elegant discussion for a more civilized age.